This hearing of the Task Force on Defending Constitutional Rights and Exposing Institutional Abuses will come to order. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for taking the time to be here. Without objection, the chair may declare recess at any time. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to today's hearing before the Task Force on Defending Constitutional Rights and Exposing Institutional Abuses on the discriminatory, harmful, and often illegal nature of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI policies. DEI is, by its very nature, an affront to the principles and ideals that define our great nation and a rejection of the progress our predecessors made in ensuring civil rights protections for all Americans. Our forefathers fought and died to ensure that this country would be a place where every person has the opportunity to achieve great things as the fruit of his or her own talents and hard work. Civil rights leaders of the 1950s and 60s fought tirelessly in the pursuit of these same principles to ensure that America would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Today, DEI has become a euphemism for a Marxist ideology which seeks to undo those very efforts by civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and his contemporaries. DEI represents a conscious effort to specifically judge people by the color of their skin and other immutable characteristics. Not only is this an utterly disgusting and racist ideology, but it is also a clear violation of the Constitution and federal law. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 clearly prohibits unlawful employment practices that discriminate against an individual because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And the Supreme Court ruled in a 2023 case that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits racial discrimination in college admissions practices. Meanwhile, DEI policies embody racist and stereotypical attitudes harbored by the left towards groups that these policies purport to benefit. Do Democrats believe that these people would categorize as diverse, do not possess the skills to succeed in our society without quotas or preferential treatment? Apparently, yes, we know this because the mask slips and they admit this explicitly. New York Governor and Democrat Kathy Hochul patronizingly claimed in 2024 that, quote, black kids growing up in the Bronx don't even know what the word computer is, end quote. I guess if you believe that nonsense, DEI makes a lot more sense. And as it isn't just prominent Democrat politicians, some of the largest American companies bought into this absurdity. For instance, companies such as Macy's, BlackRock, Starbucks, Disney, Google, Amazon, among others, in recent history instituted aggressive DEI policies. In higher education, institutions have, in open defiance of the Supreme Court, merely rebranded their racist DEI practices while continuing to seek out novel means to racially categorize and then discriminate against individuals. To combat this, the Trump administration has taken historic action to enforce federal civil rights law and ensure all Americans are protected from discrimination. Despite this bold stance against discriminatory practices, this committee is concerned that the DEI proponents in industry and academia are just biding their time. The behavior of the radical left indicates that DEI is not truly eradicated from our society, but merely lying dormant and licking its wounds until it has an opportunity to rise again. If the left does not abandon this obsession, where will that lead our country? I look forward to a discussion today on how we can work towards a society that has eradicated insidious discrimination under the guise of DEI. And with that, I yield to the ranking member, Ms. Simon, for her opening statement.
Thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the witnesses. Thank you all for coming here today. And before I begin my opening statement, I would, in thinking about this hearing and thinking about the recent passing of one of my core mentors, Dr. Clarence Jones, who was the attorney and speechwriter for Dr. Martin Luther King. Mr. Jones, for many folks who have followed the civil rights movement, has been a seminal and clear voice of what is in front of us as a nation. And I think of him, and I think of his words and his teachings as we move through today's conversation. So, it's with that I'm so thankful that we are all here to have the conversation. And I do also think that it's extremely appropriate that we're meeting today just weeks after the Supreme Court struck down Donald Trump's effort to redefine what it means to be an American. Because that's the real issue at stake today. That's what we're talking about today, of who counts, who belongs, and who deserves a seat at the table. The question before us is simple. Will we welcome Americans who look and pray and love or think differently, or will we turn our backs on the diversity that has always made this country stronger? Mr. Chairman, these questions we know are not new. Throughout our history in this country, these arguments have been made by people convinced that they were defending America. When Strom Thurmond held the floor on this campus for 24 hours against the Civil Rights Bill, he insisted that he hated no one and that he was only defending the Constitution. George Wallace claimed he was preserving order when he said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. In 1956, 101 members of this body stood and signed the Southern Manifesto insisting that school desegregation was unconstitutional. Yes, school desegregation was unconstitutional. And let me just say that one more time. It was 101 members of the United States Congress who stood firmly with the ideals listed out in the Southern Manifesto. They believed that they were on the right side of history. And that's not ancient history. That's the world that my own mother was born and raised in the deep rural South. I raise this history, Mr. Chairman, because the arguments before us today, this morning, are from a mirrored pattern. Now, let me say something about the three letters at the center of today's hearing. Our chairman cited those three letters as a pretext for discrimination. That's not been the experience in the institutions that I've served and some that I've run. Those three words meant ensuring that a veteran had the desk that they needed, that they could use. That disabled veteran rallied for accommodations and they got it. It means a first-generation student who needed a mentor and a worker who knew how to report the abuse that they had received and they were heard. None of that is quota. None of that takes a seat for anyone. The law forbids discrimination, and it forbids it for all of us, every single one of us in this room. Today, the majority will speak about fairness, but fairness means recognizing that for most of our history, there was one group of Americans who had been ushered to the front of the line. That is not hyperbole, that is fact. After generations, that head start began to feel something like an inheritance, and sharing that opportunity feels like loss. But acknowledging that head start, removing those barriers, and expanding opportunity, it's not discrimination. When someone sees a few more chairs at the table and calls it a takeover, we hear discomfort. That opportunity is no longer reserved for those who have always and already had it, but the opportunity belongs to every American. Wealthy and powerful people want to weaponize that discomfort to divide us, to divide you, to distract you, and to entrench the power that they still hold behind the scenes. But justice does not diminish anyone. It simply makes room for everyone. If my colleagues truly cared about the thumb on the scale, the record is waiting. Black workers with the same credentials are still hired, this is fact, and paid less. With the same credentials of their white counterparts, students from the wealthiest 1% of families in this country are more than twice as likely to attend top colleges and than their middle class counterparts with similar test scores. That is fact. At Harvard, a study found that 3 out of 4 legacies, donors, staff, recruited athletes, those admittance would not have been admitted without those preferences. That's a thumb on the scale. The heavy thumb on that scale has always been pressed for folks who needed it the least. So I have a question as I close for every single witness that has come here today and the ones that will follow. If fairness is truly your principle, are you prepared to challenge every unfair advantage, or only the efforts designed to expand opportunity for those folks who have too often been left out? Now, I love this country enough to tell the truth about it. The signers of the 1956 Southern Manifesto in defense of school desegregation, against school desegregation, were lawyers, and they were statesmen and electeds as well, sure of their footing. And the record kept their names. The record kept their names to place a count on what they chose. There will be a record of this morning as well, read one day by people who will never meet our faces. And they'll know exactly what side we chose to defend. I've chosen mine. Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Simon. And now, without objection, Representatives Clay Higgins of Louisiana and Mr. Minifree of Texas are waived on to the task force for the purpose of asking questions at today's hearing. I'd like to welcome our witnesses for being here, and thank you for being here. First, we have Mike Gonzalez, the Angeles T. Arredondo e Pluribus Unum Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, excuse me. Next, we have Inez Foucher-Stepman, Senior Policy and Legal Analyst at Independent Women. We're also joined by Dr. Michael Shires, the Vice Chair of Education, Opportunity, Higher Education, and Senior Policy Officer at the America First Policy Institute. So thank you all for joining us. I'm really looking forward to hearing your testimony as well. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will the witnesses please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and you can take a seat. We appreciate you being here today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statement and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral statements to 5 minutes. As a reminder, please press the button on the microphone in front of you so that it is on and the members can hear you. When you begin to speak, the light in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the light will turn yellow. When the red light comes on, your 5 minutes have expired, and we would ask that you please wrap it up. I now recognize Mr. Mike Gonzalez for his opening statement.
Chairman Gill, Ranking Member Simon, members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify of the persistence of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across American institutions. My name is Mike Gonzalez. I'm a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. The views I express in this testimony are my own. 2 weeks ago, I spent 10 days in 3 European countries, starting with 5 days in the United Kingdom. As I was able to witness, the country is still reeling from the recent stabbing death of a young man who died because police shackled him and allowed him to bleed to death after his attacker accused him of having been racist. The police have been trained in anti-racist practices, so they sided with the attacker and suppressed their natural instinct to save a person bleeding to death. That man was Henry Nowak, and his death was caused by DEI. But entire societies can become victims of DEI. On the 4th of July, the White House published a devastating report on the Smithsonian Institution, revealing how DEI and DEI-type thinking has spread deeply into all our cultural entities, including our museums. The report reveals that DEI permeates thousands of exhibits that reframe America, recasting the founding as a story of pure evil. The National Museum of American History held more than 400 DEI initiatives in 2023 alone. One of them included a discussion of a toolkit that contained a chart that could have been written by Ibram X. Kendi. It said the ultimate goal is to structurally transform museums into anti-racist multicultural institutions in a transformed society. Which brings us to the question, what is DEI? The initials stand for things we should want. However, the intention of these words has been distorted as they now mean the opposite. Diversity is now an identity-based approach that violates individual character, enforces intellectual conformity, and demands quotas in order to attain community proportionalism. As for equity, it means equality of outcomes, which is a violation of equality before the law. It sounds like equality, but it now means its functional opposite, as candidate Kamala Harris demonstrated in November 2020 when she tweeted, quote, "There's a big difference between equality and equity. Equitable treatment means we all end up in the same place," unquote. That is not the American ideal, but a Marxist promise written in sand. Inclusion, meanwhile, means exactly its opposite, exclusion. We just saw an example of this when baseball players for the San Francisco Giants were prevented from wearing references to Bible verses on their caps. Inclusion is language codes. DEI is therefore illegal. It transgresses the American understanding of the promise of equal treatment from which we must never deviate. DEI is also immoral, as it demands that we treat people differently because of immutable characteristics, that is, traits they were born into and which they can never change, such as race, sex, national origin, etc. To do so is recognizably unjust. President Biden, or whoever controlled the levers of power during his years in office, put this anti-American and immoral insanity on steroids. The DEI regime did not, of course, emerge with President Biden. DEI trainings go back over many decades, but it has been over the past 15 years or so that the acronym has become standardized. DEI trainings are nothing more than struggle sessions as practiced in China during the Cultural Revolution. These trainings attempt to indoctrinate Americans and stop them from viewing their country as worthy of patriotic love and see it instead as a place so structurally unjust that it requires system-wide transformation. President Trump has tried to reverse this regime through executive orders that explicitly targets President Biden's programs, directs federal agencies to eliminate DEI initiatives throughout the federal government, and calls for increased scrutiny of DEI practices in schools and universities that receive federal support. Most recently, OMB issued a new rule change that also fights DEI. Unfortunately, schools and university administrators who remain intent on continuing to discriminate based on race and sex have tried to figure out how to defy the president or to at least game the system. It is up to you to cement President Trump's actions into legislation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, and thanks for staying within the time limit. I now recognize Inez Felter-Stepman for her opening statement.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the task force, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I currently serve as Senior Policy and Legal Analyst with Independent Women and Independent Women's Law Center. For almost 30 years, Independent Women's unique methods and trusted brand have shaped public preferences, policies, and movements to create a better future for men and women alike. Independent Women's Law Center supports that mission by advocating for individual liberty, equal opportunity, and respect for the constitutional order. Today's subject matter, in my opinion, is critical for all three of those missions. When I came here to testify on this exact issue in 2024, I identified three major factors barring the promise of colorblind meritocracy and equality under the law from being real in the United States. First, the enforcement of anti-discrimination law in admissions and in the workplace had become hypersensitive to mere statistical disparities in outcomes and alleged microaggressions while looking the other way as universities and companies announced and then followed up on their intention to actively discriminate in favor of preferred racial categories and against disfavored ones. Second, and related, the legal doctrine of disparate impact, imagining systemic racism as a kind of god of the gaps to be assumed anytime outcomes don't come out perfectly racially balanced, even in the face of total lack of evidence of any animus, had become baked into our legal system in a variety of ways. Disparate impact is, or optimistically was, the legal enforcement arm of the DEI empire. Third, the Biden administration, building on groundwork from the previous Obama administration, redefined the basic word used in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, sex. Up until that point, from time immemorial, sex had meant biological sex. And all of a sudden, under these administrations, it suddenly included gender identity, so-called, as declared by the individual. That false definition was illegitimately substituted and used to transform all of anti-discrimination law in the United States without a single legislative vote. But now we're in 2026, more than a year and a half into the second Trump administration. On day one, this president declared that the federal government was actually going to enforce equality under the law, regardless of whether the thumbs on the scale benefited Black Americans or white Americans or anyone else. The promises of the president's roster of day one EOs have taken some time, and I'm sure a lot of hard legal and bureaucratic work across disparate agencies to come to fruition. But now this ideal that it's illegal to use characteristics like race and sex to make important decisions about people's lives and work is being shaped in real time. As I sit here before you today, I'm pleased to be able to say that enormous progress on each one of these fronts has been made. Although anti-white discrimination continues to exist in ideologically dedicated institutions, as Mike testified, they resist this kind of enforcement. In no era in my lifetime have more strides been made towards the American ideal of being judged by merit rather than immutable characteristics. It's a simple ideal, but rare, and one no less worth fighting for now that discrimination is against whites and being laundered under the gauzy terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion than it was during the first wave of the civil rights movement, when racial discrimination was implemented against blacks. As Chief Justice Roberts memorably put it back in 2007, the way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. There is no diversity exception to this just colorblind principle of our law. No matter our race, Americans should expect to be judged fairly and on the merits, not on the basis of skin color, religion, or sex. We can either have civil rights and just treatment for every American, or we can have a legalized racial hierarchy system and balkanized resentful politics that puts us at each other's throats. Despite being considered controversial in some of our elite institutions, this principle is very popular. Americans of all political stripes, from red Florida to blue California, and from all backgrounds, agree that we ought to be judged by the content of our character and what we have to offer on the basis of merit, whether we seek to offer that merit to an admissions committee, an employer, or as a contractor working with the federal government. That's why even in my deep blue home state of California, when voters are presented with the opportunity to reject racial discrimination for any reason and embrace colorblind meritocracy, they overwhelmingly choose to do so. The Trump administration is, for the first time in decades, enforcing the Civil Rights Act and the Constitution equally for all Americans. But this laudable progress is fragile. Equality under the law and colorblind meritocracy need codifying from this body and protection from its highest court. Now it's up to Congress and the Supreme Court to make sure that the principles of colorblind justice and equality under the law, the only fair system in a multi-ethnic republic, continue to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now recognize Dr. Michael Shires for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Gill, Ranking Member Simon, and members of the task force. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm grateful for your leadership and service to our nation. I'm honored to testify before you today about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI policies, and their devastating impact on one of our most important national treasures, America's colleges and universities. I'm speaking today in my capacity as the Vice Chair of Education Opportunity and Senior Policy Officer at the America First Policy Institute, a nonprofit research institute whose focus is putting the interests of the American people at the forefront of American public policy. I lead our extensive work in higher education, including our work that shows how DEI undermines the quality of the education provided to millions of Americans each day. I also speak as someone who spent nearly 40 years in higher education policy and leadership, including 25 years as an administrator and professor at Pepperdine University, and most recently 3 years as the founding chief of staff at the Free Speech University of Austin. A few days ago, we celebrated the 250th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence, the proclamation that launched America on a path to freedom, opportunity, and prosperity unrivaled in human history. The central premise of that declaration is the notion we all know: all men are created equal. And even though we haven't always lived up to that ideal, pursuing it has fueled American success for the past 250 years. Yet today, our leading institutions, including our colleges and universities, have set aside this principle, instead advancing a virulent DEI ideology rooted in the belief that the United States is systemically racist and a white supremacist project. DEI argues that certain disfavored groups, including whites, men, heterosexuals, even political conservatives, are oppressors who must give up their privilege in favor of those who are not. Today, this insidious ideology infects nearly every dimension of the academy, including hiring, promotions, tenure, admissions, and even academic publishing. Over the past 4 decades, I have watched this contagion metastasize on campuses. I've sat in university diversity committee meetings where I was personally scolded by my peers for the color of my skin. I've been asked to draft loyalty statements to this ideology in order to apply for jobs and explicitly told to hire candidates because of their race or gender and not because of their ability to do the job. I've seen it devastate careers, and I've seen it close the door of opportunity to some of our best and brightest students. This leftist monoculture undermines the very purpose of the American investment in higher education: to equip the next generation of Americans to think, debate, and make the best decisions in a complex world based on evidence, not prejudice. Unfortunately, the conversation on most university campuses is more about indoctrination and advancing this leftism than promoting shared American values. The leftists who have co-opted America's institutions tolerate only one perspective on campus: theirs, undermining the very intellectual diversity needed for higher education to fulfill its primary public purpose. Unaligned speakers are canceled, students who disagree are failed, faculty are intimidated into silence or fired. Shout-downs, hecklers' vetoes, violence, and even murder are used to silence dissenting voices. The American people collectively rejected this anti-American discrimination and divisiveness when they elected President Trump. And he responded, taking bold steps to roll back the left's DEI stranglehold on higher education by revoking the previous executive orders that mandated it. He's aggressively enforced existing laws that ban discrimination in all forms, including those demanded by DEI. He limited the use of disparate impact in civil rights law and reformed accreditation to ensure institutions are transparent and accountable to the American people who fund them. As a result, DEI forces today appear to be in retreat. Do not be deceived. Many of these discriminatory processes are still at work, just reformulated or hidden for the moment. AFPI supports and applauds the administration's actions to reinstitute merit and opportunity for all Americans in higher education, regardless of race, gender, or other characteristics. To persevere, these changes must be codified into law, and we welcome the opportunity to work with Congress and the administration to ensure equal treatment for all Americans and of every background in our colleges and universities, much as our founding fathers would have envisioned 250 years ago. Thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shires, and thank you to all 3 of you once again for taking the time to come here and testify before us. We're now going to move on to the question portion of this hearing, and we're going to kick it off with the great Governor Byron Donalds to begin. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
I appreciate the sentiment, Chairman. About 115 days to go. Dr. Shires, thanks so much for being here. I want to pick up where you left off. In your view, what is the current state of academia with respect to DEI programs? Like what's actually happening in there today?
On most campuses, DEI is still in full force. You see institutions, for example, that require diversity statements for application have eliminated that, but yet every single website that helps you apply for a job has information on how to circumvent not having it to make sure that they know that you are aligned with DEI.
Are we seeing the same issue in some federal agencies, even though the Trump administration obviously has put out executive orders to unwind DEI practices in federal agencies?
Absolutely. It's important to remember that the universities and the academy are kind of the epicenter for our professional workforce. And so as students graduate and have been indoctrinated in this ideology, they carry it with them into the workplace.
Like what, in these agencies and even in the universities, what are some of the ways that they are rebranding DEI to try to basically kind of be in the shadows away from the eyes of the American people?
The most common one is if you see an Office of Community Belonging, it's where all the people that were in the DEI office now are on campus.
Well,
I'm sorry?
Point of clarification for me, what is community belonging?
Well, it's what they call DEI offices now. It takes the inclusion part of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it talks about how you empower and enable students in these protected classes to be on campus and to be engaged. But it's really the same operation that was there before about dividing the campus.
Well, why don't we just empower them to be in class and actually learn? Wouldn't that be empowering a student?
I believe it would be, yes.
Let me answer this question, because I've never heard of this classification. Say that community
Community belonging.
Community belonging. Okay, I've never heard this term before, but that's okay. That's why we're having this hearing. If this is what colleges and institutions are moving towards to shield or to rebrand DEI, what are some metrics or some planks that policymakers need to be looking out for so that while we continue to move towards a true colorblind society based upon merit, that we are examining what's happening at institutions of higher learning who still want to hold on to DEI programs by this name of community belonging? What should we be looking for?
Much we should be doing is enforcing existing law. I mean, current laws against discrimination prevent universities from treating students differently. And yet, on many campuses, we now have separate graduations. Imagine if we'd had a graduation for white students only, for example, what the uproar would be. And yet, on many campuses, we have ethnically based graduations. And so we want to look at enforcing current discrimination law. I think the civil rights focus for so long has been on opening the door to opportunity, and we've allowed this engine to build over it of overt discrimination through DEI.
Well, thank you for that. Ms. Stepman, your testimony was actually quite interesting. Quick question, what are some of the, have you been studying or looking at what some of the current practices in corporate America are around DEI? Is it something that corporate America is largely stepping away from, or are they trying to rebrand similar to what's happening on university campuses?
I think corporate America is, for better or worse, is a much less ideological environment than the university campuses. I would expect universities to fight this tooth and nail for ideological reasons. I've been much more encouraged. I think if you had asked me that question just a couple years ago, I would have given you a more pessimistic answer. I've been pretty positively encouraged by the response of corporate America here, although they're definitely trying their best to hide and memory hole all of the things they said in 2020 and 2021. Fortunately, we have records of those statements, both external and internal, and those will be used for litigation. But I do think that they are backing off of some of these commitments. We'll see whether that new commitment to meritocracy is maintained once this administration leaves power.
Okay, interesting. Thank you for that. Mr. Gonzalez, do we have a reliable estimate on the cumulative taxpayer dollars spent across the federal bureaucracy on DEI, personnel, contracts, and training programs over the last 5 years?
I'm sure that exists. I don't have it, but I can get it and forward it to your office.
No, I look forward to seeing that. Listen, I want to thank you all for taking the time to come. Chairman, thank you for leading this effort to make sure that the United States is focused on true merit between all people, regardless of race. I think that's going to be critical to the future of the United States, and I yield back.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Walkinshaw from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General C.Q. Brown, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, a fighter pilot, commander of all Air Force operations in the Indo-Pacific, recipient of the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal, and a Bronze Star, among others. Fired, not for cause, not because he lacked the experience or the qualifications to lead. Rather, he was fired by President Trump amid an ideologically motivated purge of military leaders. After, by the way, Secretary Hegseth suggested that he got his job due to race. Kind of ironic from someone who got his job based on being a cable news celebrity. Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Chief of Naval Operations, a former surface warfare officer, former commander of U.S. Naval Forces Korea, deputy commander of U.S. Naval Forces Europe and U.S. Naval Forces Africa during the 2018 strikes against Syrian chemical weapon facilities. Again, fired without cause. My colleagues here today want to spin a false narrative. They want to claim that diversity efforts are at odds with merit-based policies. But these firings did nothing to bring or restore merit to our armed forces. President Trump's policies are removing the best of the best from positions of power, not because they lack qualifications or experience, but because this administration is hostile to seasoned leaders whose views differ from theirs, perhaps, and whose backgrounds don't fit their specific stereotypes. And when this plays out in the institution of our armed forces, readiness suffers. But don't take my word for it. In the words of Admiral McRaven, the four-star who oversaw the raid that killed bin Laden, there is, quote, no doubt that General Brown and Admiral Franchetti were war fighters, committed to the cause through and through. If President Trump and my Republican colleagues and our witnesses here today want to talk about advancement based on merit, they owe the American people an explanation for dismissing two, and I'm just talking about two here today, exceptionally qualified military leaders while the president is starting wars of choice across the globe. In the words of General Stanley McChrystal, the four-star who oversaw the Joint Special Operations Commander in the Iraq War, these efforts are a complete distraction, a waste of time, and in fact run counter to the concept of a meritocracy. What they're really about, as General McChrystal observes, is making the U.S. military an exclusive organization that only values service from people of a certain gender and of a certain race. Admiral McRaven goes on. These recent firings raise a risk that senior officers will be overly cautious about providing their best advice, and therefore the risk of military miscalculation, and wow, have we had some miscalculations lately, will grow dramatically. So let's call it what it is. Efforts to exclude qualified women and people of color from positions of power. They're not doing away with DEI, they're just doing racism and sexism. And the American people will suffer as a result. Ms. Felcher-Stepman, you expressed concern that this administration's, quote, new commitment to meritocracy might be lost in a future administration. Do you agree or disagree with Admiral McRaven, General McChrystal, that these firings had nothing to do with merit?
No, I have no way of doing that, but there are only several bases on which it's illegal and unconstitutional to fire someone, and that's the purpose of the hearing today, right? Is
Do you think these were these merit-based firings? Is there any evidence to suggest they were?
The president, we elect a president, not generals, right? So he has to have the legitimacy to choose.
Should he fire them based on merit?
He can make any decision he wants for the people who are working under him because the American people elected him.
Maybe your organization should look into these firings and see whether they were merit-based or race-based or sex-based. Will you do that?
If they were race-based or sex-based, they would be illegal.
Why don't you look into them?
I don't see any evidence of that.
Why don't you do a report on that?
I don't see any evidence of the fact that it was race-based or sex-based, and
Thank you,
those are
Mr.
the
Chairman.
only
I yield
ways
back.
that is illegal to fire someone. The president can fire somebody for disagreeing with him.
Mr. Chairman, my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. And I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions. Dr. Shires, what is DEI?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, as my colleague, Mr. Gonzalez said earlier, is none of those three things. It is an ideology that's based on a philosophy. It comes out of the academic world. It's based on a philosophy that society is driven by we are driven by our environment and our identity, and the world that we live in is constructed from it. As a result of that, we are victims of the world around us, essentially. And in that world, they divide people into oppressors and the oppressed in the Marxist tradition to leverage power.
Are DEI policies compatible with meritocracy?
They are not.
Could you elaborate?
Meritocracy is based on the idea that you measure somebody based on what they're doing, not what they look like. DEI policies actually call for equal outcomes for everyone. And so if I perform at a different level than someone else, they are automatically placed in that same level.
What do DEI policies mean in practice?
In practice, it means quotas. It means that at the
Racial
end-
quotas.
It does, and just like the congressman mentioned, you know, the perception that people are promoted to ranks without the adequate backgrounds, whether that's legitimate or not. In this case, I don't think it is, but that is the perception that arises because you simply assign people status based on who they are and not what they've done.
Ms. Stepman, racial quotas seem un-American to me, don't they, to you?
Yes, and they're illegal.
And they're illegal. Under DEI regimes, what races do colleges and universities typically least prefer in their admissions processes?
Whites, men, Asians. Men is not a race, obviously, but there actually might be a little bit of reverse discrimination actually going against women now because women so predominate on universities. But yes, whites and Asians primarily.
Why do you think that it's primarily those groups?
Because they're in a war with the reality of these disparities. So if you want to have a quota that comes out perfectly racially balanced at the end, the only way that these universities have been able to achieve that is by discriminating on the basis of race and sex in their admissions.
And you mentioned that a lot of colleges and universities, you expect to fight DEI restrictions. Why is that? You said that there was an ideological component there.
Right. I think my fellow witness correctly referenced the idea of the oppressor and the oppressed. There's this idea that all differences in culture, disparities, outcomes, all of these are somehow immediately evidence of discrimination and some kind of unjust system. And so if there's an ideological commitment to make sure that they kind of force the world to look the way that they think it ought to. And unfortunately, that's both immoral, discriminatory, and it, fortunately for us, it's illegal under the law of the United States.
Could you walk us through, practically speaking, what a DEI policy would mean for a college admissions process?
It means that in practice, they place a thumb on the scale for applications that may have no more or, in fact, lesser qualifications than other applications purely on the basis of race. And by the way, we saw this in the data in Students for Fair Admissions. Harvard was absolutely discriminating against Asian and white applicants who are comparably situated to other applicants. And we know that universities have been doing this for decades.
Mr. Gonzalez, BlackRock has a scholarship exclusively for diverse students. That's their words. What do you think diverse means in that context?
Yeah, that is actually diversity should mean that you have people of diverse backgrounds. Often enough, diverse means members of any of the so-called marginalized groups alone, without any participation by Asian Americans or white Americans.
That seems discriminatory, does it not?
And as Ms. Felcher said, it's not just discriminatory, it's also illegal and immoral.
Mm-hmm. We see this across the corporate world. Starbucks has a training program for employees limited to, quote, Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color BIPOC partners. Do you think that's discriminatory?
And illegal. I think the corporate world, I agree with Ms. Felcher. I think the corporate world is, in fact, trying to move away. I've heard many anecdotes of
Their goal at the time was for BIPOC representation to be at least 30% at all corporate levels and at least 40% at all retail and manufacturing roles by 2025. That sounds like a racial quota, doesn't it?
That's a quota, that's illegal, that's immoral. However, since President Trump was elected, they're actually coming forward and saying, hey, we're so glad you're making this illegal, you're discouraging us from doing this. We didn't want to do it in the first place. And so I agree with Ms. Felcher that the corporate world is moving at a much faster rate than the academy.
Thank you, and my time is up, so thank you. And I'd now...
Mr. Chairman, a UC request?
Yep, without objection.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a February 21st, 2025 article from Military Times titled, Ending military diversity efforts will cost us talent and readiness, which shows active duty service members believe dismantling programs is undermining military readiness and recruitment of diverse talent.
Without objection.
Ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a March 27, 2026 article from NPR titled, Defense Secretary Hegseth Intervened to Stop Promotions of Black and Female Officers.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'd like to enter into the record an article from The Hill called Asian American Students Were Victims of Racial Discrimination, as well as another article called The Left's Incurable DEI Addiction. And with that said, I will now recognize Ms. Presley from Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Today's hearing is irrational. Today's hearing is irrational, it is misguided, and it is consistent with the Republicans' war on diversity, equity, and on inclusion. Now, Republicans control the White House. They've rigged the Supreme Court. They have majorities in both chambers of Congress. And they are using the full weight of that power, the full force of that, and your taxpayer dollars, might I add, of this federal government in this moment to enact precise harm on working families. There are no oversight hearings on high unemployment and the rising costs, and there are no hearings on protecting voting rights or affordable health care coverage. Instead, Republicans have decided to focus on attacking everyday people who are just trying to make ends meet. Their agenda is anti-Black, it is anti-immigrant, it is anti-LGBTQ, it is anti-worker, and again, since we're talking about DEIA and the dismantling of it, it is also anti-veteran, it is anti-rural, it is anti-disabled, and it most certainly is anti-woman. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives were created to promote fairness because there are real biases in America that disadvantage specific groups of people. That is a fact backed by mountains of data. While there has been progress, the work is unfinished. Actually, the work is piling up due to Republicans emboldening greater discrimination while simultaneously dismantling civil rights protections. For example, women face systemic gender discrimination. I know you can't tell by looking at the Republican Party, but women make up 50% of this country, and we deserve equal rights. So I'm going to start with a simple question, and Ms. Felcher-Stepman, I'm going to begin with you because actually the fact that your women's forum even exists, some might even consider that to be a DEI initiative. But let me just ask you a question. Do you believe America should have gender equality, meaning that women and men should have equal rights under the Constitution and our laws? Yes or no?
I believe that women and men
Yes or
can
no?
and do have
Yes
equal rights
or
under
no?
the Constitution.
Yes or no? One more time to keep it clean here. Do you believe America should have gender equality, meaning that women and men should have equal rights under the Constitution and our laws? Yes or no?
I believe they should have equal rights, yes.
Okay. And Dr. Shire, yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez, yes or no? All right. Well, unfortunately, the Constitution is silent on this topic. And that is why I've introduced legislation to add the Equal Rights Amendment as the 28th Amendment, enshrining it as the law of this land. Now, look, y'all, every Democrat in the House has signed on to my bill, but I'm still waiting on my Republican colleagues to join. So until we are able to codify gender equality in the Constitution, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies have supported women in every aspect of their lives. For example, women have served in the military for more than 200 years, yet Republicans in your anti-diversity campaign have denied multiple women promotions just because they are women, not to mention those that have just been fired. Women get paid less money for doing the same work as men, but since Republicans are anti-equity, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has weakened enforcement of pay discrimination laws, maintaining and widening our gender wage gap by the day. Y'all have any daughters? Not to mention Black women making 65 cents on the dollar to white men. And finally, women are underrepresented in medical trials to find cures for diseases that affect us. But because Republicans are attacking inclusion, they cut funding for women's health research projects. So let me sum it up. Anti-DEI is anti-woman. And those harms are compounded by attacks on voting rights, like the so-called Save America Act that Republicans are fixated on passing, which could disenfranchise nearly 70 million women simply because their last names on their ID no longer match their birth certificates after being married, which pro-family people seem to care about. Not to mention the attacks on bodily autonomy. As women, our bodies are treated as a debate, and Republicans are passing laws that restrict what we do and when we do it, something men have never had to struggle with. So when it comes to Republicans on this committee who are all men, enacting more harm on women through anti-DEI hearings like this one, we need to call it out and fight back. Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this June 2026 article from Afrotech titled Civil Rights Organizations and Nonprofits Sign Letter Demanding Transparency and Response from the Trump Administration Regarding DEIA Ban.
Without objection.
So y'all, since Donald Trump is so loud and proud about these efforts to dismantle and defund DEIA, why do you think the Trump administration is hiding all the data on their firings? Okay, I guess that's my time. All right then, thank you.
Thank you. The gentlewoman's time has expired. Thank you, Congresswoman. And I'd be happy to look at your Equal Rights Amendment and read through it. I guess my biggest question was, does it define what a woman is?
I look forward to your signing on.
We'll take a look at it. I just was hoping for some analytical clarity, but thank you. We'll take a look at it. And I've got some UCs as well. DEI has jeopardized air safety. DEI policies threaten medical excellence. Uncovering radical efforts to disguise DEI. Justice Department investigation determines UCLA's medical school discrimination based on race and admissions. And with that said,
I have a request.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record January 26, 2025, an article from CNN entitled, Trump Gutting of Federal DEI Programs Will Hit Rural Poor Communities, which shows to push.
without objection.
Okay, it's right here.
I'll now recognize Mr. Menifee for 5 minutes for the purpose of asking questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. We've heard a lot today about y'all's views on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. My take is these are about leveling out a playing field that has historically not been level, where there are folks in this country who are all running the same race, but for some people, their lane has obstacles in it. It has hurdles, it has water pits, and that is because of discrimination that was pushed, instituted, and facilitated by government at every single level. So I want to start with you, Dr. Shires. You've written much about how DEI programs fuel racial stereotypes. You talked here a little bit today about your opposition to these programs, and I think that's consistent with what we've heard from our Republican colleagues, as well as Vice President Vance, who I believe called them a deliberate program of discrimination against white men. So let me ask you this. Take a random white person in America today and a random black person. When they go apply for jobs, when they apply for a home loan, when they're getting their home appraised, when they're seeking higher wages, would you say that those two people are more likely than not to be on the same playing field?
Legally, yes.
I have no clue what that means. In practice, are they likely to be on the same playing field?
I guess what I'm trying to understand is what playing field are you comparing them on? I mean, in your metaphor, you talk about how some lanes on the track have obstacles and others don't. The solution to that is to remove the obstacles. It's not to change the finish line. And DEI changes the finish line, whereas the federal laws against the discrimination are there to remove the obstacles. So if you're asking, if the question is, how do I get to the situation where both of them have the same access? The answer is removing the obstacles and enforcing the law. It's not changing the finish line.
Well, there are also DEI programs that remove the obstacles that the president has removed from the federal government. But my question to you is, if a random white person in this country and a random black person in this country go to get their home appraised, right, why is it that the black person is much more likely to get a lower value on their home appraisal?
Because they live in a different neighborhood?
Okay, great. We'll get to that in a second because that's wrong. Black people in this country were enslaved for at least 240 years. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and after slavery ended, you had about 100 more years at least of Jim Crow and legal segregation, where government at the federal, state, and local level blocked black people from owning land, from getting bank loans, from living in certain neighborhoods, from attending certain schools. All of that happened too, right?
Yes.
Okay, so my question to you is simple. Name the year that the playing field became completely even. I want you to give me a date.
Again, it depends on what playing field you're talking about. I mean, if you're looking at
For
average,
home loans, you brought, I think we talked about home loans and appraisals. For home loans, what year did it become equal?
well, according to the DEI movement in 1991, when they imposed disparate impact.
So you're telling me today that if a black person goes and applies for a home loan, they have the same likelihood of getting accepted for that loan as a white person does?
I'm saying under the DEI rules, yes, that would be the case. We know in practicality that people have different income profiles and experiences. If you're asking me a person that lives next door to another person, if one is white and one is black and they go both apply for a loan, do I expect different outcomes? No. And if there are, then it should be enforced under discrimination laws.
So you're talking about rules, I'm talking about outcomes. So let's play a game of true and false, and let's start with wealth disparities. The median net worth of a white household in this country is $285,000. The median net worth of a black household is about $45,000. True or false?
I don't know.
Okay, you came here as an expert today in a DEI hearing, and you don't know that? Basic facts about wealth accumulation in this country? All right, let's go to the next one. For every $100 in wealth held by white families, black families hold about $15. True or false?
Again, I don't know those specific numbers.
Okay, well, I have data here, it's true. So we know that the answer here isn't just that black people believe in saving less than white people do, right? It's that government in this country has put one set of folks in a better position to succeed than other people. And it was the law for a very, very long time, and it became ingrained in our institutions. Government was part of the problem, and so it has to now be part of the solution. So let's do this true or false game again for employment and wages. Black workers are far more likely to be unemployed as white workers at almost every education level. True or false?
That is true.
So do you just believe that black people are more lazy or aren't as good at applications? Why do you think that data is the way it is?
I think the data is that way it is because our educational system has dramatically failed the black community, and instead of solving it, we just let them into college where they then have a higher rate of failure because they
I wasn't aware that there's a black education system and a white education system. In my
said
district, we
our
have schools that are represented, all races in there, and the same outcomes. The same school has different outcomes for black kids and white kids. My time is up, but in short, if the government was part of the problem, the government now has to be part of the solution.
Thank you, and I now recognize Mr. Jack for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge my friend, John Bonk, and his wife, Laura, who are in the audience with us today. I wanted them to see a committee hearing, and I wanted them to see, Mr. Chairman, what a freshman can do when they excel in this committee, as you no doubt are exemplary proof. When you are a great freshman, you have a chance to lead in Congress and get a gavel, and that's exactly what you've proven. So today, Mr. Gonzalez, I'd like to start with you. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the history of DEI and some of the initiatives we've seen in the corporate workplace. Could you help us understand what, from where this emanated and who developed these initial ideas to implement these policies?
Representative Jack, thank you for your question. So they have been around for many years. As initially, they were a response to the Civil Rights Act. They wanted, throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they wanted to make sure that companies were doing the things that the government demanded, first of contractors, government contractors, then of just any business. Very quickly, these degenerated into practices and trainings that were part of a larger framework that saw America as being basically racist. And that's when, especially since in the last 15 years, when the acronym has become more defined, they began to look a lot more like the struggle sessions that practiced in the Cultural Revolution in China, which were meant to change the thinking of a whole society.
And I'm just curious, over those past 15 years, I mean, what's really precipitated the acceleration of this? It seems like it's commonplace now and something that we're trying to identify. We're having a congressional hearing on it today. Was there or is there funding that's going toward this? Are there groups that are trying to sow division and discord vis-a-vis this initiative?
Yeah, you can see a lot of studies have been made on the use by newspapers and at the Academy of the terms of DEI, whiteness, systemic racism, et cetera. And they begin to really spike in 2014. And I have associated that with the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2013, in June of 2013, and then the Ferguson riots in 2014, when we really the country began to change enormously. And that obviously culminated in 2020, which is when really diversity trainers were brought here to Congress. Robin DiAngelo met with members of one party, nearly all of the members of one party, and gave a training session. So you had two spikes, 2014, and then a huge spike in 2020.
Doctor, thank you very, very much for your testimony. Dr. Shires, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the Trump administration has accomplished with respect to shutting down DEI policies at over 300 colleges and universities. But it seems like some of these academic institutions are just changing the name or trying to rebrand the effort to comply with some of the executive orders. Could you expound on that for us?
Absolutely. It's important to remember that the Students for Fair Admissions ruling came down during the Biden administration. And the Biden administration did effectively nothing to implement the idea that we were supposed to have colorblind admissions in universities. And so the Trump administration has been open and transparent. It's shined the light of sunshine, if you will, on the actions of these institutions. We see the lawsuits with the Department of Justice against the medical schools right now, the engagement with the ABA. It's literally just raising the conversation to say this discrimination is happening and we need to stop. And so the main actions have actually been these negotiations with high-profile institutions. The administration offered a compact to talk about creating transparency around these issues. I was part of the accreditation rulemaking where they added complying with civil rights laws as part of the responsibilities of accreditors to ensure that universities respond to federal law. So it's kind of a full court press. Most recently, the administration issued new guidance on disparate impact rules and how they're used. And again, this is Department of Justice guidance. It still hasn't been tested in the courts yet.
And in our closing 30 seconds, what more could Congress do to help accelerate and codify some of these actions that the Trump administration has led on?
Well, I think the first is to codify the disparate impact changes, and I know Chairman Gill has a bill on this that would touch those issues. I think beyond that, it's a lot about transparency and it's about enforcement. I think Congress should revisit the Higher Education Act and take some of the issues around civil rights and the public interest in higher education. For example, having intellectual diversity on campus as a key dimension to why the government funds higher education, and those should be codified in the Higher Ed Act. I think that continued conversations and rulings around our hearings around these issues as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a UFC request.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from Time Magazine, February 25th, 25, how Trump's attacks on DEI are hurting communities that voted for him, which describes how his
Without
initiatives
objection.
have hurt programs in West Virginia.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir.
I now recognize Mr. Min for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Gill, Ranking Member Simon, for hosting this hearing. I just want to note again, this is a task force nominally created to defend constitutional rights and expose institutional abuses. I'm still waiting on the hearings on, say, the constitutional rights protecting people against illegal search and seizure from political motivated prosecutions, or on Article 1 and its clear edicts that Congress and only Congress can declare war, appropriate funds, or levy taxes. But I guess we'll keep waiting for those hearings. Now, before getting into politics, I was a law professor. My research focused on banking and corporate governance. I actually served on the admissions committee for 2 years, so I have some insights on diversity and inclusion here. And I think people often falsely frame diversity and merit as competing concepts, and that is not typically the case. This is about expanding opportunities, about leveling the playing field. And as someone who's on the admissions committee before the Harvard case where the Supreme Court overturned and nullified affirmative action, but post-Bakke, which you're all familiar with, where we were allowed to use race as a factor, we used it as a factor. It could not be dispositive. There were no quotas. And I also know there's a lot of misinformation about what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually look like, say, in higher ed. I know that was also the case in workplaces, in government hiring practices, and the like. We were allowed to use it as a factor. Now, one thing I will just point out is that we actually much more explicitly used ideological diversity as a proxy because we wanted to have a diverse institution. We didn't want to have all liberal students. So we actually pushed up a lot of students that probably would not have qualified because they were outspoken conservatives. And I just want to make that point that I think a lot of folks in this room have problems with diversity unless it includes, say, their viewpoints. And their viewpoints, let's be honest, for a long time were underrepresented in higher education institutions, in the workplace, because by pure numbers, people who are outspoken conservatives were not typically measuring up in getting into places like Harvard or Yale, so they had to adjust and try to get people in. I will also note that the research is pretty clear that diversity is associated with better outcomes, whether it's in the workplace, whether that's in decision-making in academic institutions, whether that's in research, and certainly in the boardroom, which is what I'm familiar with. And you're probably all familiar with the litany of research out there that not just suggests, but very clearly shows a correlation between diversity in boards, corporate boards, and ROI. And so the McKinsey study is one example of the many, many studies out there. I think McKinsey found that on average, firms in the top quartile, top 25% of diversity on their corporate boards were 27% higher ROI than their counterparts. That is typical of the findings we have. And the reasons for it's not just theoretical, it's because we have a lot of outcomes associated when you don't have diversity. You have groupthink, you have echo chambers. These have all been well documented. You have the problem of yes men. And I just want to highlight something that I think is a very clear example of this today. Pete Hegseth is probably Secretary of Defense, probably the most notorious example of someone who has tried to get rid of diversity in the name of pursuing, I don't know, something that looks more like him, that people that look like him, that talk like him. He has notably, apparently, fired or prevented the promotion of a number of African Americans and women. And yet I think by all accounts, what we have seen to date in less than 2 years is an absolutely disastrous Department of Defense. We have a Secretary of Defense that is more concerned about facial hair than constitutional violations. There appeared to be no exit plan, no strategy when he went into Iran. This is a problem when you have groupthink and you're just trying to promote people that look like you. You create that echo chamber, and I think this is a very clear example. I will also just note that across the board in my district in Orange County, which is one of the most diverse places in the country, where we have one of the most booming economies in the country, I invite you all to come visit. You can see it's really great when you can go get boba or an In-N-Out burger in the same day, like across the street from each other. A lot of great outcomes associated with the diversity that is being so vilified here. And Orange County, I think, benefits from that diversity in our institutions, among our entrepreneurs, among our elected officials. And the problem right now that we're seeing is as diversity is being stripped out of so many agencies across the board at the federal level, I have heard from just so many of my different stakeholders, whether it's pharmaceutical companies, whether it's construction companies, that they have difficulty now because the expertise that was in place at agencies like the FDA, USDA, whatever else they're dealing with, no longer there because in an effort to strip out diversity, the Trump administration has stripped out expertise. Now, with that, I don't really have any questions for you because I think we've heard your comments. I just want to close by saying diversity matters. It is the heart of this country, is what has made America so great to begin with. As a son of immigrants, I will say that proudly. I believe that the reason our military, our institutions are so much more powerful and effective and lethal than any other countries in the world that don't have that diversity is because that diversity gives us strength. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman,
You recognize?
I have a unanimous consent request.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record 3 items. First, I'd like to enter into the record from the U.S. Department of Education, a press release entitled U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights launches Title VI investigation into Fairfax County Public Schools.
Without objection.
I'd like to enter into the record an article from Fox News. Watchdog urges DOJ probe of top research university over alleged illegal DEI practices defies common sense.
Without objection.
And lastly, I'd like to enter into the record an article from America First Legal, which is CMS removes Biden-era DEI framework from kidney transplant program following America First Legal's rulemaking petition.
Without objection.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a May 8th, 2025 article from CNN, which describes how the Trump administration's anti-DEI push has gutted critical medical
Without
research.
objection.
It's titled Trump's Diversity Purge Freezes Hundreds of Millions in Medical Research at Universities Across the Country.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a March 12, 2025 article from The Real Deal titled "Doge Cancels Affordable Housing Deals in Anti-DEI Push."
Without objection.
And second, a December 5th, 2022 research article from the Brookings Institute, "How Racial Bias and Appraisals Affects the Devaluation of Homes in Majority Black Neighborhoods."
Without objection.
Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Simon for her 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate us having this conversation today because what we're lifting up is, it seems like, a lot of anger and frustration with the way that things are in this moment. And I would agree, the American people all over the country, from sea to shining sea, they're angry and frustrated and afraid as they see the cost of living skyrocket under the administration. Prices are up and families across the country are struggling to make ends meet. We all know, if you go to the grocery store right now, the price of ground beef or orange juice. We're talking about DEI, but I have a couple of questions as it relates to what is actually germane to most folks in this country in this moment. Mr. Gonzalez, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has found that the price of everyday goods like food and housing and clothes has increased more than 4% over the last 12 months. Mr. Gonzalez, yes or no, is DEI the reason that Americans can't afford clothes or groceries?
No, I believe Biden was.
Okay, no, I'm asking you right now, is DEI groceries?
Yeah,
Is
you know,
DEI?
I don't think that DEI has anything to do with that. I think
Thank you.
President
I'm
Biden's
going
policies
to move
did.
forward. What about housing? Is DEI the reason why 2 teachers working in any state in this country can't afford to buy a house?
Again, I would say Biden.
Okay, Biden is the reason why, but not DEI. So Biden.
I don't think DEI has
But we're
anything
not.
to do
But
with
Biden
inflation.
is not the president right now. But we'll move forward. Ms. Stepman, and if I mispronounce your name, I really apologize. The American families on average paid $310 more for groceries in 2025 under the current administration than they did in 2024. Yes or no, did DEI cause that?
No, there are in fact other issues under the sun.
Thank you. Dr. Shires, under our current administration, gasoline prices have increased by more than 50% since this disastrous war. Is DEI the fault of that?
I don't believe so.
Thank you, sir. This is why, I think all of us, many folks who are watching, are struggling with the conversation today. City after city, in rural space after rural space, folks are struggling with the realities of gas and grocery prices. Just a few days ago, a family called my office, not from my state, from a red state, requesting resources because their child's clinical trial was cut by this administration. That baby who is struggling with cancer, the clinical trial is over, the port has been taken out of her chest, she will go home to die. And we are talking about inclusion and equity and diversity. While SNAP benefits are cut, folks can't afford their mortgage, and we're having a conversation about the lexicon of diversity. But okay, did DEI make the president's approval rate fall to 39%? Is DEI the reason that Republicans can't pass any of their bills on the floor this week? Is DEI the reason that the Supreme Court upheld birthright citizenship? Did DEI kill the dinosaurs? I don't think that the American people are buying this attempt to divide and distract and scapegoat. Because what I would say, Mr. Chairman, it's feeling and sounding a lot like 1967 in this room. If you know, you know. We know what's happening. We know what this conversation is really about. And none of us have any real answers about what we're doing today outside of having a conversation that is set to break the commitment to include all Americans, to uplift the fact that we look different. We have different languages. We may pray differently. But the assault on that beauty, that's what we're litigating. Okay, but it's disgusting. And you want to blame DEI, you want to blame foreigners, you want to blame people of color for the price of gas, for the inaffordability in this country, and the fact that literally right down the street, folks who are working 2 and 3 jobs can afford to take their baby to daycare. And I'll yield back. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for this conversation today.
Thank you, Ms. Simon, and I would just note that DEI policies are what drove the United States allowing foreigners to buy up homes with FHA loans. I think they did drive up the price of
Mr.
housing.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to talk about the GI Bill and the Stanford study?
I'm happy to talk about anything you'd like to talk
literally
about.
showed tens of thousands of mortgages being taken out, and less than 1% of those GI
what our side of the
mortgages are
aisle
1%.
is hoping for is for college admissions and business hiring decisions to not be based on
I don't
race.
think that white men are in the minority of any of the top 10
I
colleges.
don't either, and never suggested that. With that, and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses. If there's no further business, without objection, the task force stands adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.